You wake up and your wrist is throbbing. You didn't fall far, just a few feet, off a curb, wrong angle. Within an hour, you're in an emergency room. An X-ray machine reads the fracture in under 2 minutes. A doctor sets the bone. A cast goes on. You're given antibiotics, just in case. 6 weeks later, you're fine. Now remove all of that. Remove the hospital. Remove the X-ray. Remove the antibiotics. Remove even the concept of a doctor. Go back 45,000 years. In 1957, an American archaeologist named Ralph Solecki was excavating a cave in northern Iraq called Shanidar. He uncovered the skeleton of a Neanderthal man, now known as Shanidar I. The man had died somewhere between 40 and 50 years old. Old by Neanderthal standards, but it wasn't his age that stunned researchers. It was what his bones had survived. His right arm had been amputated above the elbow, likely decades before his death. He was blind in one eye, the bone around the socket crushed and healed. He had severe hearing loss in both ears. His right leg showed a healed fracture that would have left him with a pronounced limp. By every modern measure, this was a man who should not have lived past the injuries that created these wounds, let alone lived for years afterward. Here's the disruption. None of this healed by accident. Bone doesn't set itself into a functional shape without time. Without stillness, without someone bringing food while the injured person cannot hunt, cannot walk, cannot see out of one side of their body. Solecki's discovery didn't just show that a Neanderthal broke a bone. It showed that an entire community carried him through it. This is going to change how you think about what survival actually meant for early humans, because survival wasn't a solo act. It was a system, and broken bones are where that system becomes visible. Start with the arm. The amputation on Shanidar I is one of the oldest known deliberate or trauma-driven limb removals in the human fossil record. Researchers studying the bone in the decades since Solecki's find noted that the remaining bone surface was smooth and rounded, a sign of healing, not a fresh wound. That means the amputation happened years before death. For that healing to occur without infection killing him first, the wound had to be kept clean, likely packed with something, and protected during a period when he could do almost nothing for himself. That's not the whole story. Move to the leg. Shanidar I's right leg shows a healed fracture and signs of degenerative joint disease consistent with an altered gait, meaning for years, maybe decades, he walked differently than everyone around him. On flat modern ground, a limp is an inconvenience. In the Zagros Mountains, 45,000 years ago, on terrain that shifts between rock, snow, and steep valley slopes, a limp is a liability every single day, every hunt, every migration, every search for water. He could not have kept pace with a mobile group on his own. And yet the isotope signatures in his bones, the chemical record of what a person actually ate, show no signs of the starvation you'd expect from someone unable to contribute to hunting. He was fed, consistently, for years. That detail matters more than the fracture itself. Here's where it gets stranger. In 1971, a South African-American paleoanthropologist named Margaret Clark reviewed cases like Shanidar I alongside other Neanderthal remains and proposed something that unsettled the field at the time: that Neanderthal social structures may have included sustained care for the disabled. Not occasional charity, but structural, ongoing support built into how the group functioned. Before this, the assumption was that early hominins lived by a brutal calculus. If you couldn't keep up, you were left behind. Shanidar I broke that model. A one-armed, partially blind, partially deaf man with a limp lived into his 40s in an Ice Age environment. That is not possible without other people making a repeated, costly decision over years to keep him alive. But here's where it gets stranger still. Shanidar I wasn't an isolated case at that site. In 1960, Solecki's team uncovered Shanidar III, another Neanderthal skeleton showing a rib injury that had partially healed before death. Evidence the individual survived a serious wound for weeks or months afterward. Across multiple Neanderthal sites in Europe and Asia, researchers have since cataloged dozens of individuals who lived with healed fractures, missing teeth that would have required a modified diet, and joint damage that would have limited their mobility for years. This wasn't a single act of compassion at one cave. It was a pattern. Before antibiotics, before antiseptics, an open fracture was often a death sentence. Not because of the break itself, but because of what grew inside it. Bone infection, known as osteomyelitis, leaves its own signature: pitted, porous bone, where healthy bone should be smooth. Researchers examining Neanderthal remains across sites in Europe have found surprisingly few cases of this kind of infection relative to the number of healed fractures, fewer than you'd expect by chance alone. That gap is the evidence hiding in plain sight. Something was being done to prevent it. The most likely answer isn't a lost medicine. It's simpler and, in some ways, more demanding. Constant care, wound cleaning, repositioning a body that cannot move itself, bringing water to someone who cannot fetch it. In 2012, a team of researchers analyzing dental calculus, the hardened plaque on Neanderthal teeth at a site called El Sidrón in Spain, found chemical traces of yarrow and chamomile, two plants with no significant nutritional value but long-documented medicinal use. Bitter, not something you eat for taste. Something you eat or are given because someone believed it would help. That detail changes the shape of the story. This wasn't a species relying on luck to patch itself back together. It was a species that had already begun to separate the question, can this body still work, from the question, does this life still matter? Shanidar one could not hunt, could not see fully, could not hear well. And still, for years, someone decided he was worth the food, the time, the risk. You live in a world where a broken bone is an inconvenience, resolved in a single afternoon by strangers in a building designed for exactly that purpose. But the impulse underneath that system, the decision to keep someone alive who cannot currently earn their place through labor or utility, did not begin with hospitals. It did not begin with medicine. It began in a cave in the Zagros Mountains, tens of thousands of years before writing, before agriculture, before anything you would call civilization. The cast on your wrist and the care shown to a blind, one-armed man 45,000 years ago come from the same place. Not technology, something older than that.